They say diamonds are a girl's best friend, but in the wrong hands, they are simply evidence. Tonight, you're going to hear the story of Emma, a woman who watched her husband's mistress, Julia, flaunt a massive sapphire ring across a dinner table. Julia thought she had won the prize, the wealthy husband, the status, and the jewel. She thought the wife was oblivious, but she didn't know that the ring didn't just sparkle. It held a secret history that would destroy her life and bankrupt the husband she stole. Betrayal has a price, and tonight the bill is due. The air in the private dining room of Le Chateau, Manhattan's most exclusive French restaurant, smelled of truffle oil, old money, and impending disaster. Emma Thorne sat at the head of the mahogany table, her posture impeccable. She wore a vintage black velvet gown that absorbed the dim light of the chandelier, making her pale skin look almost like marble. To the outside observer, she was the picture of the dutiful, wealthy wife. She was the woman behind Michael Thorne, the charismatic CEO of Thorne Logistics. But Emma wasn't just behind Michael. She was the foundation he stood on, though he had long since forgotten that fact. She took a slow sip of her sparkling water, her eyes scanning the table. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of the merger with the Sterling Group. Arthur Sterling, a silver-haired shark of a man, sat to her right, discussing golf handicaps, but Emma's focus was entirely on the two empty chairs opposite her. Michael was late, and he wasn't alone. "So, Emma," Arthur said, leaning in, his voice raspy. "Michael tells me the quarterly projections are through the roof. He's quite the genius, your husband." Emma smiled. It was a cold, practiced curve of the lips. "Michael has always been ambitious, Arthur. He sees things others don't. Like a future where he doesn't lose everything," she thought. Just then, the heavy oak doors swung open. The chatter in the room died down instantly. Michael Thorne strode in, radiating that specific brand of arrogance that comes from new money and too much cologne. He was handsome, in a broad, aggressive way, wearing a bespoke Italian suit that cost more than most people's cars. But no one was looking at Michael. Clinging to his arm was a woman who looked like she had walked out of a high-definition Instagram filter. She was young, painfully young, with cascading blonde extensions and a red dress that was perhaps a size too small and a shade too bright for a business dinner. This was Julia Vance, Michael's executive assistant. Emma felt a familiar burning sensation in her chest, but she extinguished it instantly with a mental splash of ice water. She had known about Julia for 6 months. She knew about the condo in the West Village. She knew about the trips to Cabo labeled as supply chain inspections. She knew everything. "Apologies for the delay, everyone," Michael boomed, his voice filling the room. Traffic on the FDR was a nightmare, and of course, we had to stop for a little celebration on the way. He squeezed Julia's waist tight, too tight for a boss and his employee. Julia giggled, a sound that grated on Emma's nerves like sandpaper. "Michael is such a perfectionist," Julia cooed, scanning the room. Her eyes landed on Emma, and for a split second, the mask slipped. There was a flash of triumph in the girl's eyes, a look that said, "I'm here, and you can't do anything about it." "Emma, darling," Michael said, guiding Julia to the empty seats. "You remember Julia, don't you? I needed her here tonight to take notes on the merger details. Critical stuff." Emma didn't blink. "Of course. Julia, it's lovely to see you again. I wasn't aware executive assistants were required for celebratory dinners, but Michael does rely on you so heavily." Arthur Sterling cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. In these circles, affairs were common, but flaunting them at a merger dinner was a breach of protocol that bordered on insanity. "Please sit," Emma said, gesturing to the chairs. The sommelier was just about to pour the 82 Petrus. Julia sat down, flipping her hair over her shoulder. As she reached for her water glass, she made a show of extending her left hand. She held it there, suspended in the air for a beat too long, ensuring the light caught the object on her ring finger. It was a ring, a massive, deep blue sapphire surrounded by a halo of jagged, antique-cut diamonds. The room seemed to drop a few degrees in temperature. Emma stared at the ring. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry out. She simply froze, her heart hammering a war drum against her ribs. She knew that ring. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry Michael had picked up at Tiffany's to shut his mistress up. It was the thorn sapphire. It had belonged to Emma's grandmother, a matriarch of the shipping industry, who had been buried with a replica because the real one was too valuable to put in the ground. It was supposed to be in the safety deposit box at the bank, a box only Michael and Emma had access to. Michael had stolen it. He had stolen her family legacy and put it on the finger of a 24-year-old girl he met at a boat show. Julia saw Emma staring. She smiled, a cruel feline expression. She adjusted the ring, twisting it so the sapphire faced Emma directly. "Is something wrong, Mrs. Thorne?" Julia asked, her voice dripping with faux concern. "You look a little pale." Emma slowly picked up her napkin and placed it on her lap. The shock had passed, replaced by a cold, lethal clarity. The game had changed. Before tonight, Emma was planning a divorce. But now she was planning an annihilation. "I'm perfectly fine, Julia," Emma said, her voice smooth as silk. "I was just admiring your jewelry. It's quite distinct." Michael laughed nervously, pouring himself a glass of wine. "Oh, that? Just a little trinket. You know how hard Julia works. Performance bonus." "A bonus?" Emma repeated. "How generous." She looked at Arthur Sterling. The lawyer was staring at the ring too, his brow furrowed. He recognized it. He had handled Emma's grandmother's estate. Emma caught Arthur's eye and gave a barely perceptible shake of her head. "Not yet," she signaled. The waiter arrived with the appetizers, foie gras with fig jam. As plates were set down, Julia leaned over to Michael and whispered something, giggling again. She rested her hand on his shoulder, the sapphire gleaming aggressively. "So," Julia said, addressing the table but looking at Emma. "Michael tells me this merger is going to make us all very rich. I've been helping him look at new properties in the Hamptons. We think the current estate is a bit dated. Don't you think, Emma?" The audacity was breathtaking. She wasn't just wearing the ring. She was redecorating Emma's life. Emma sliced through her foie gras with surgical precision. "The Hamptons estate has been in my family for 3 generations, Julia. It's dated because it has history. Something you might find difficult to purchase, regardless of the budget." Julia's smile faltered. "Well, Michael likes new things. Don't you, sweetie?" Michael choked slightly on his wine. Well, renovations are always an option. But let's talk business. Arthur, the valuation?" As Michael launched into a monologue about synergy and stock options, Emma sat back. She watched the way Julia stroked the ring, possessing it, claiming it. Enjoy it while you can, Emma thought. Because by the time dessert comes, that ring is going to feel heavier than a pair of handcuffs. The first course was cleared, replaced by lobster bisque, but the tension remained as thick as the cream in the soup. Michael was drinking too fast. Emma noticed this immediately. It was his tell. When Michael felt in control, he sipped expensive scotch. When he felt the walls closing in, or when he was lying through his teeth, he gulped red wine like it was water. He was currently on his 3rd glass. Julia, conversely, seemed to be growing more emboldened with every passing minute. She clearly interpreted Emma's silence as submission. In Julia's mind, she had already won. She was the younger, hotter model, sitting at the big table, wearing the wife's heritage on her finger. "This soup is delicious," Julia announced, though she had barely touched it. She turned to Arthur Sterling. "You know, Michael and I were discussing the branding for the new company. I think Thorn Global sounds much better than keeping the legacy names attached. It's time for a fresh start, right?" Arthur Sterling, who had been the legal counsel for Emma's father for 30 years, wiped his mouth slowly. He looked at Michael. "Is that so? You're consulting on branding now, Miss Vance?" "I have a good eye for what people want," Julia said, flashing the ring again as she gestured. "And people want power. They want Michael." Emma took a sip of water. "Interesting perspective," she said quietly. "Though usually, branding decisions are made by the board of directors, not during pillow talk." Julia's eyes narrowed. "Michael is the board, essentially. Everyone knows he runs the show." Michael laughed, a booming sound that lacked mirth. Now, let's not bore the ladies with corporate structure, eh, Arthur? Julia is just enthusiastic. She's very passionate." "I can see that," Emma said. She turned her gaze directly to the ring. It was time to start pulling the thread. "Speaking of passion, Michael, that is a truly remarkable piece of jewelry you gave Julia. You called it a performance bonus?" Michael stiffened. He adjusted his tie. "Yes. Well, you know. Strong quarter." "It's funny," Emma continued, her voice conversational, "because I wasn't aware we had the liquidity for a purchase of that magnitude. A sapphire of that size. Judging by the cut, it looks like an early 20th century cushion cut, unheated, likely from Kashmir, would retail for upwards of $300,000. Julia's eyes widened. She looked down at the ring with newfound greed. She clearly had no idea of its value. She just knew it was big and blue. 300,000? She breathed. "At least," Emma said. "Perhaps double, if it has a specific provenance." She looked at Michael. "Did you go to Sotheby's, darling? Or perhaps Christie's?" Michael was sweating now. Beads of perspiration were forming on his forehead, despite the cool air conditioning. I have a private dealer. Look, Emma, why are we talking about jewelry? We have a merger to sign." "Because details matter, Michael," Emma said. "You know how much I love antiques. May I see it closer, Julia?" Julia hesitated. Her instinct was to pull her hand away, to hoard her treasure. But she also wanted to rub it in Emma's face. She wanted Emma to see every facet of her defeat. "Sure," Julia said, extending her hand across the table. "But don't touch. I just got it sized." Emma didn't need to touch it. She leaned in, her eyes locking onto the setting. There, on the side of the platinum band, was a tiny, almost invisible engraving. "Vincit qui patitur." He conquers who endures. The family motto of the Van der Hoven family, Emma's mother's maiden name. It was undeniable. Michael had raided the deposit box at the grand downtown branch of Sovereign Bank. "Beautiful," Emma whispered. "Truly one of a kind." "Michael has excellent taste," Julia preened, pulling her hand back. "He certainly takes risks," Emma said, leaning back. "Tell me, Julia, did he tell you where he got it?" "He said he had it custom made for me," Julia lied, or perhaps she was repeating Michael's lie. "He said the blue matches my eyes." Emma laughed softly, a dry, humorless sound. "Custom made? How fascinating, because that setting is Edwardian. They stopped making those prongs in 1915. The table went silent. Michael slammed his wine glass down, sloshing red liquid onto the white tablecloth. "Emma, enough with the history lesson. You're boring everyone." I find it fascinating, Arthur Sterling interjected. His voice was like gravel. He was looking at Michael with a predator's gaze. Arthur knew the motto. He knew the ring. And now he knew Michael was not only an adulterer, but a thief. Michael, Arthur said slowly. Perhaps we should discuss the assets listed in the merger agreement, specifically the liquid assets and the personal holdings. We can do that later, Michael snapped. Let's order the main course. Waiter. As the waiters scurried over to refill glasses and take orders for the mains, Emma felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. The anger was gone. In its place was the cold calculation of a CEO, which, unbeknownst to Julia, Emma actually was. See, Michael liked to play the big man. He was the face of Thorn Logistics. He gave the speeches, he shook the hands, he sat in the corner office. But the company was structured as a holding of the Van der Hoven Trust. And the sole trustee? Emma Thorn. Michael was a salaried employee with a very fancy title. He could spend money, sure, he could make decisions, but he couldn't sell the company, and he certainly couldn't give away family heirlooms that were listed as trust assets. By giving Julia that ring, Michael hadn't just insulted Emma. He had committed grand larceny and embezzlement against the trust. Emma picked up her menu. I think I'll have the venison, she told the waiter. Rare, very rare. She looked across at Julia, who was busy whispering in Michael's ear, trying to calm him down. Julia, Emma said. Julia looked up, annoyed. Yes. Make sure you don't drop that ring, Emma said, her voice dropping an octave. It would be a shame if you lost it before you found out what it really costs. Julia rolled her eyes. I'm not going to lose it, Emma. It's mine. Possession is 9/10 of the law, they say, Emma mused. But that last 1/10, that's the part that sends people to prison. Michael froze. He looked at Emma, really looked at her, for the first time that night. He saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen in years. He didn't see his submissive, trophy wife. He saw the daughter of the industrialist ruthless enough to swallow competitors whole. What is that supposed to mean? Michael demanded, his voice shaking slightly. It means, Emma smiled, that dinner is going to get very interesting. To understand the magnitude of the mistake Michael Thorn had just made, one had to understand the history of the Van der Hoven Empire. Emma was not simply a rich wife. She was the only child of Ethan van der Hoven, a man who had built a shipping empire not with handshakes, but with ironclad contracts and ruthless acquisition strategies. When Ethan died 10 years ago, the world assumed his handsome, charismatic son-in-law, Michael, had inherited the throne. The newspapers ran headlines like, "The new king of logistics, Michael Thorn takes the helm." But the newspapers didn't read the fine print of Ethan's will. Ethan had liked Michael. He found him charming, energetic, and useful for public relations. But Ethan didn't trust Michael with money. He had seen the way Michael gambled on sure things, the way he bought sports cars he didn't drive, and the way his eyes wandered to every passing skirt. So, Ethan had constructed a cage made of gold. The entire company, the real estate, the liquid assets, and yes, the jewelry collection, were placed into the Van der Hoven Irrevocable Trust. Michael was appointed CEO of the operating company, drawing a generous salary and receiving a discretionary bonus. But the power, the veto rights, the ownership of the physical assets, that remained with the trustee, Emma. For 10 years, Emma had allowed Michael to play the part. She stayed in the background, raising their 2 children, currently away at boarding school in Switzerland, organizing the galas, and quietly correcting Michael's business errors from the shadows. When Michael wanted to buy a fleet of trucks that were mechanically unsound, Emma quietly had the legal team kill the deal. When Michael wanted to invest millions in a tech startup that was clearly a Ponzi scheme, Emma lost the paperwork until the window closed. She had protected him from himself. She had built the myth of Michael Thorne, the genius CEO. And how did he repay her? By finding a 24-year-old Instagram model, moving her into a condo paid for, Emma now realized, likely by skimming from the maintenance budget and stealing the family matriarch's engagement ring. The ring was the final straw. Emma sat at the table in Le Chateau, watching Michael laugh too loudly at one of Arthur's polite jokes. She remembered the day she had shown Michael the deposit box. It was 5 years ago. They were updating their wills. She had opened the heavy steel box at Sovereign Bank, and the blue light of the sapphire had flooded the small, sterile room. "It's worth more than the house," she had told him. "It's the fail-safe. If everything goes to zero, if the world ends, this ring rebuilds the family." Michael had looked at it with hunger, not reverence. "Why keep it locked away?" he had asked. "It should be seen. It's not for show, Michael. It's insurance." He must have gone back. He must have forged her signature on the access logs. The audacity was staggering. Sovereign Bank had strict protocols. For Michael to get that box open, he would have had to bribe a bank manager or falsify a power of attorney. Both were felonies. Emma took a slow breath. She looked at Julia, who was now taking a selfie with her wine glass, carefully angling her hand so the ring was center frame. "You poor, stupid girl," Emma thought. "You're wearing a felony on your finger." Emma reached into a clutch and pulled out her phone. Under the table, she unlocked it. She didn't open Instagram or WhatsApp. She opened a secure app linked to the private security firm her father had used for 30 years, Blackstone Global. She typed a quick message to the head of security, a man named Victor, who had more scars than friends. Message: Priority 1. Sovereign Bank Deposit Box 404. Verify access logs for the last 3 months. Secure footage. Also, run a full asset trace on Julia Vance. I want to know everything she owns, rents or leases. Initiate protocol. Dissolution. She hit send. The phone vibrated with a reply 3 seconds later. Acknowledged, Mrs. Thorne. ETA on logs. 10 minutes. Team is moving. Emma put the phone away. The machinery was in motion. The gears were grinding. The cage door was closing, and Michael was standing right in the center of the trap, holding a glass of Pinot Noir. "So," Julia said, her voice piercing Emma's thoughts. "Arthur, tell me, does this merger mean we get access to the corporate jet? Michael promised we could take a trip to the Amalfi Coast next month." Arthur Sterling paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. He looked at Michael, his eyebrows raised so high they almost touched his hairline. "The corporate jet," Arthur said slowly, "is for business use, Miss Vance. And currently, it is grounded for maintenance." "Oh, Michael can fix that," Julia said, waving her hand dismissively. "He's the CIO. Emma smiled. It was time to tighten the screws. "Actually, Julia," Emma said, her voice pleasant, "the jet doesn't belong to the company. It belongs to the trust. Michael leases it. And the lease, well, it's up for review." Michael glared at Emma. "We can renew it, Emma. It's a formality." "Is it?" Emma asked. "The trust is very particular about expenses, especially recreational ones. Tell me, Michael, how did you categorize the purchase of the ring? Was that a business expense too? Client acquisition, perhaps?" Michael choked on his wine again. He set the glass down hard. "I told you, it was a bonus. From my personal savings." "Your personal savings," Emma repeated. "That's impressive, considering we have a joint account and I balance the books every month. I didn't see a $300,000 withdrawal. Did you win the lottery, darling?" Julia looked between them, confused. She sensed the danger now. The air in the room was vibrating with hostility. "Why are you grilling him?" Julia snapped at Emma. "He bought me a gift. You're just jealous because he didn't buy you one." Arthur Sterling let out a short, sharp cough that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Emma turned her gaze to Julia. It was a look so cold it could have frozen the wine in the glasses. "Jealousy is for people who don't own things, Julia. I don't need gifts. I own the store." "Okay," Michael shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The cutlery rattled. "That is enough. Emma, you are ruining the dinner. Arthur, I apologize. My wife is tired." "I'm not tired, Michael," Emma said, her voice calm and steady. "I am wide awake. In fact, I've never been more awake." She turned to Arthur. "Arthur, before we sign the merger papers later, I think we need to clarify the schedule of assets, specifically the section regarding encumbered property." Arthur nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand the game. "Go on, Emma." "If an asset listed as collateral for the company is missing," Emma said, looking directly at the sapphire ring, "then the merger is fraud. Isn't that right?" "Technically, yes," Arthur said. "If significant assets are unaccounted for, or if they have been misappropriated, it would void the contract and potentially trigger a criminal investigation." Julia frowned. "What are you talking about? It's just a ring." "It's not just a ring," Emma said. "It's the Thorn sapphire. But more accurately, it is the Van der Hoven sapphire. It is listed as Asset Number 404 in the family trust. It is insured for $4.5 million. The color drained from Julia's face. $4 million? Michael looked like he was going to be sick. "Emma, stop. We can talk about this at home." "No, Michael. We're talking about it now, because you brought the evidence to dinner." Emma pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Julia's hand. "That ring is stolen property, and you, Julia, are currently in possession of stolen goods. In the state of New York, possession of stolen property valued over $1 million is a Class B felony. Mandatory minimum sentence. I believe it's 5 years." "Arthur?" Arthur took a sip of his wine, his eyes twinkling. "Depending on the judge, up to 25. Julia yanked her hand off the table as if the ring had suddenly turned red hot. She grabbed her napkin and covered her hand. "He gave it to me. I didn't steal anything." "Ignorance of the law is not a defense, Julia," Emma said, "especially when the rightful owner is sitting across from you telling you it's stolen." "Michael!" Julia shrieked, turning to him. "Tell her she's crazy. Tell her you bought it." Michael opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was trapped. If he admitted he stole it, he was going to jail. If he said he bought it, he had to produce a receipt for $4 million. Money he didn't have. Michael stammered. "I borrowed it." "Borrowed?" Emma raised an eyebrow. "You borrowed a multi-million-dollar heirloom from a high-security vault without the trustee's permission. That's not borrowing, Michael. That's embezzlement." Just then, Emma's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it. "Victor, logs confirmed. Michael Thorne accessed box 404 3 days ago. Forged signature detected on entry slip. Video evidence secured. Police are on standby, per your instruction." Emma smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had just felt the trap snap shut. "Well," Emma said, looking up, "it seems we have a problem. My security team just confirmed the theft. They have the video of you at the bank, Michael." Julia let out a small whimper. She started trying to pull the ring off her finger, but her hands were sweaty, and her fingers were swollen from the salty food and the alcohol. The ring wouldn't budge. "It's stuck!" Julia panicked, tugging at the sapphire. "Get it off! Get it off me!" "Calm down, Julia," Michael hissed, grabbing her wrist. "Stop making a scene." "I don't want to go to jail," Julia screamed, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "You told me you were rich. You told me she was a nobody." "I am rich," Michael yelled back, losing his composure entirely. "I am the CEO." "You," Emma cut in, her voice like a gavel striking a desk, "are a glorified manager, Michael. And as of this moment, you are unemployed." The room went dead silent. Even the waiters stopped moving. "You can't fire me," Michael sneered. "I built this company." "My father built this company," Emma corrected. "You just rented the chair, and per the morality clause in your employment contract, Section 8, Paragraph C, committing a felony and engaging in conduct that damages the reputation of the firm are grounds for immediate termination with cause. No severance. No stock options. Nothing." She looked at Arthur. "Arthur, do you have the termination papers? I believe we prepared a draft last year when he lost that $50K in Vegas, just in case." Arthur reached into his briefcase, which had been sitting by his feet. He pulled out a thick file folder. He placed it on the table. "I always keep a copy, Emma. Prudence is a virtue." Michael stared at the folder. His face turned a shade of purple that clashed violently with the red wine stain on the tablecloth. "You planned this," he whispered. "You set me up." "I didn't tell you to steal my grandmother's ring, Michael," Emma said. "And I certainly didn't tell you to bring your mistress to my business dinner. You did all the work. I just set the table." Julia was still clawing at her finger. "It won't come off. Help me." She grabbed a butter knife, looking desperate enough to cut her own finger off. "Don't do that," Emma said sharply. "You'll damage the setting." "I don't care about the setting," Julia screamed. She stood up, knocking her chair over. "I'm leaving. I'm done with this." "Sit down, Julia," Emma commanded. The authority in her voice was absolute. Julia froze. "You can't leave," Emma said, "because the police are already in the lobby. If you walk out that door with that ring on your finger, they will arrest you." Julia sank back down onto the edge of her chair, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. She looked at Michael with pure hatred. "You lied to me," she hissed. "I didn't lie," Michael pleaded. "I was going to put it back. It was just for a while. Once the merger went through, I was going to buy you a real one." "So it's a fake?" Julia asked, hope sparking in her eyes. "No," Emma answered for him. "The ring is real. His promises were the fakes." Emma stood up. She smoothed her velvet dress. "Arthur, I believe the merger is off. I cannot, in good conscience, allow the Sterling Group to merge with a company currently under investigation for executive embezzlement." Arthur nodded solemnly, though a faint smile played on his lips. "I agree, Mrs. Thorne. We will withdraw our offer immediately." "Wait!" Michael stood up, his hands shaking. "Arthur, please, you can't walk away. The stock will tank. I'll be ruined." "You are already ruined, Michael," Emma said. "The stock will recover once the board announces the new leadership. But you?" She looked him up and down. "You are a liability." She turned to Julia. "Now, about my ring. We can do this the hard way, or the easy way." Julia held out her hand, trembling violently. "I can't get it off, I swear." Emma reached into her purse again. She pulled out a small, elegant bottle of lotion, high-end hand cream she always carried. "Here," Emma said, sliding the bottle across the table. "Use this, and be careful. If you drop it—" Julia snatched the lotion. She frantically rubbed it onto her finger. She twisted and pulled, gasping in pain as the metal scraped over her knuckle. Finally, with a wet pop, the ring came free. Julia held it in her slippery palm. She looked at it one last time, the symbol of the life she thought she was stealing. Now, It was just a rock that had almost cost her her freedom. She looked at Emma, terrified. "Here," she said, extending her hand. "I don't want it covered in your lotion," Emma said coldly. "Drop it." "What?" "Drop it in the glass," Emma said, pointing to her own glass of sparkling water. "Clean it." Julia hesitated. The entire restaurant was watching now. The humiliation was total. With a shaking hand, Julia held the thorn sapphire over Emma's glass. Plink. The heavy ring hit the water and sank to the bottom, bubbling as it settled. The diamonds sparkled through the liquid and glass, untainted by the sordid affair. "Good," Emma said. She picked up the glass, swirling the water gently. "Now, Julia, I suggest you leave. The police are still in the lobby, but if you leave without the ring, they might just let you go with a warning, assuming you tell them exactly what Michael told you to do." Julia didn't wait. She didn't look at Michael. She grabbed her purse and ran for the door, her heels clicking frantically against the parquet floor. Michael stood alone. His mistress was gone. His merger was dead. His job was over. He looked at Emma. "Emma, please, we can fix this. Think of the kids." Emma looked at him with eyes as dry as a desert. "I am thinking of the kids, Michael. That's why I'm ensuring their inheritance isn't squandered by a thief." She turned to Arthur. "Shall we go, Arthur? I believe I've lost my appetite." "Indeed," Arthur said, standing up. But the night wasn't over. Michael, desperate and cornered, wasn't going to go down without a fight. "You can't just walk out," Michael roared, grabbing a steak knife from the table. His eyes were wild. "I made you. You were nothing but a sad little heiress before I came along." Security guards, the restaurant's bouncers, started moving toward the table. Emma didn't flinch. She looked at the knife in his hand, then up at his face. "Put it down, Michael, before you add assault with a deadly weapon to the list." This was the tipping point, the point of no return. The silence in the private dining room of Le Chateau was absolute, broken only by the heavy, ragged breathing of Michael Thorne. He stood there, a silver steak knife gripped in his right hand, his knuckles white. The blade wasn't large, perhaps 4 inches of serrated steel meant for cutting filet mignon. But in the hands of a man watching his entire life incinerate, it looked like a saber. The other diners in the restaurant had gone quiet. A waiter dropped a tray of glasses in the distance, the crash echoing like a gunshot. But Michael didn't flinch. His eyes were locked on Emma. "You think you can just take it all back?" Michael spat, saliva flying from his lips. "I spent 10 years smiling at your boring friends. 10 years pretending to care about your father's legacy. I earned this." Emma didn't move. She didn't recoil. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, looking at him with an expression of mild disappointment, as if he were a child throwing a tantrum in a supermarket. "You earned a salary, Michael," Emma said, her voice calm but carrying to every corner of the room. "You were paid well to do a job, but somewhere along the line, you confused employment with ownership." "I am the face of this company," he screamed, waving the knife. "Without me, the stock crashes. The partners walk. You need me." "Look around you, Michael," Emma said, gesturing slightly with her head. Michael blinked, his tunnel vision widening for a fraction of a second. He saw Arthur Sterling, the lawyer, hurriedly shoving documents into his briefcase, distancing himself from the blast radius. He saw the terrified waiters huddled by the kitchen doors. And then he saw the movement in the shadows. Victor, the head of Emma's private security, had stepped out from the hallway. He was a massive man, an ex-Marine with a shaved head and a suit that struggled to contain his shoulders. He wasn't alone. Behind him were two uniformed NYPD officers, their hands resting on their holsters. "Drop the knife, Mr. Thorne," Victor said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had the finality of a tombstone. Michael looked at the police, then back at Emma. The reality of the situation began to dawn on him. He wasn't a violent man. He was a soft man, a man of luxury and comfort. He had never been in a fistfight in his life. The knife was just a prop, a desperate attempt to regain control in a room where he had none. "Emma!" Michael's voice cracked. The rage evaporated, replaced by a pathetic, whining fear. "Emma, tell them to leave. Please, we can work this out. I'll go to counseling. I'll sign a post-nup. Anything." Emma slowly stood up. She picked up the glass of water containing the sapphire ring. She swirled it, watching the jewel dance at the bottom. "You're right, Michael. You will sign something, but it won't be a post-nup." "Officer," Emma called out, "my husband seems to be having a breakdown, and he is currently threatening me with a deadly weapon." "No, no, I'm not!" Michael dropped the knife. It clattered onto the table, bouncing off a bread plate. He held his hands up. "See? No knife. It was a mistake." The officers didn't care about the retraction. They moved in with efficient, practiced speed. "Michael Thorne, turn around and place your hands behind your back," the lead officer, a stern man named Sergeant Miller, commanded. "You can't do this," Michael shouted as they grabbed his arms. "Do you know who I am? I'm on the cover of Forbes." "Turn around," Miller barked, spinning Michael around and slamming him chest-first against the wall. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was the loudest sound in the room. Click, click, click. Emma watched the process with cold detachment. She walked over to where Michael was pinned against the silk wallpaper. She stood close enough that he could smell her perfume, a scent he used to claim he loved, back when he was trying to woo her for her money. "You're not on the cover of Forbes anymore, Michael," she whispered in his ear. "Tomorrow, you'll be on the cover of the New York Post. And I imagine the headline will be something very uncomplimentary." "I'll destroy you," Michael sobbed, his face pressed against the wall. "I'll tell them everything. The tax shelters, the offshore accounts." Emma laughed softly. "My father's accounts are bulletproof, Michael. We pay our taxes. That's the difference between old money and whatever it is you are. We don't need to cheat to win." She turned to the officers. "Take him away. I'll be down to the precinct in the morning to file the formal statement regarding the theft of the heirloom." "Understood, Mrs. Thorne," Sergeant Miller said. He grabbed Michael by the collar of his $5,000 suit. "Let's go, tough guy." As they dragged Michael out of the restaurant, kicking and screaming about his rights, Emma turned back to the table. The dining room was in shambles. Wine was spilled. A chair was overturned. The knife lay on the table like an accusation. Emma picked up the water glass. She fished the ring out with 2 fingers, shaking off the droplets. It was cold and heavy. She slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Arthur," she said, turning to the lawyer who was still clutching his briefcase. "Yes, Emma," Arthur said, looking pale. "I apologize for the interruption to our dinner," she said smoothly, "but I think it's best if we reschedule the merger talks. I have some housekeeping to do at the firm first." Arthur nodded vigorously. "Of course, absolutely. Whenever you're ready." "Good." Emma signaled for the maitre d', who was hovering nervously nearby. "Jean-Pierre," she said. "Yes, Madame Thorne. I am so sorry." "Don't be," she cut him off. "Put the dinner on the company card, but not the wine Michael drank. Bill that to his personal account. I want the paper trail." "Of course, madam." Emma grabbed her clutch. She walked out of the restaurant, her head held high. She didn't look back at the mess. She didn't look back at the empty chair where Julia had sat. She walked out into the cool New York night where a black town car was waiting. The war at the restaurant was over, but the massacre in court was just beginning. 3 weeks later, the atmosphere in the conference room of Sterling, Holloway and Partners was significantly less emotional than the dinner, but infinitely more brutal. The room was sterile. Glass walls, grey carpet, and a long table piled high with bankers' boxes. Emma sat on one side, flanked by Arthur Sterling and a forensic accountant named Sarah Jenkins, a woman with glasses so thick they looked like magnifying loupes, and a personality that could curdle milk. On the other side sat Michael. He looked terrible. The 3 weeks had aged him 10 years. He was out on bail, paid for by his parents, who had to remortgage their house in Ohio because Emma had frozen all of their joint assets. But he looked like a man who hadn't slept since the arrest. His suit was wrinkled. He hadn't shaved in 2 days. Beside him was his lawyer, a court-appointed attorney named David Ross. Michael couldn't afford a high-powered defense team anymore. "Mr. Thorne," Arthur Sterling began, opening a file. "We are here to discuss the terms of the dissolution of marriage and your separation from the Vanderhoven Trust." "I want half," Michael croaked. His voice was hoarse. "New York is an equitable distribution state. I want half of everything acquired during the marriage." Emma didn't even look up from her iPad. She was scrolling through emails. David Ross, Michael's lawyer, cleared his throat. "My client is correct. Despite the unpleasantness at the restaurant, the marital assets are subject to division. Mr. Thorne contributed significantly to the growth of the company over the last decade." Sarah, the forensic accountant, laughed. It was a dry, terrifying sound. "Contributed?" Sarah asked. She pushed a stack of papers across the table. "Is that what we're calling it now?" Michael looked at the papers. "What is this?" "That," Sarah said, "is a summary of unauthorized withdrawals from the corporate operating accounts over the last 4 years. It totals $3.2 million. Michael went pale. Those were business expenses, networking, client entertainment." "We have the receipts, Michael," Sarah said. "Unless client entertainment typically involves leasing a penthouse in the West Village under the name of J. Vance and purchasing a Porsche Cayenne registered to the same individual?" Michael stayed silent. "But that's not the worst part," Sarah continued, pulling another file. "See, the company accounts are one thing. That's embezzlement. We can handle that civilly if you cooperate. But this?" She tapped a red folder. "This is why you're going to prison for a very long time." Michael stared at the red folder. "What is it?" "We audited the Children's Trust," Emma said, finally looking up. Her eyes were burning with a cold white fire. "The education fund, the one my father set up for Leo and Sophie." Michael flinched physically, as if she had slapped him. "You didn't just steal from the company, Michael," Emma said quietly. "You drained our children's future. $700,000. Gone." "I was going to put it back," Michael shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "I had a deal pending with the crypto exchange. It was going to triple. I was doing it for them. You were gambling with my children's lives to buy jewelry for your mistress," Emma spat. "And speaking of your mistress," she pressed a button on the intercom. "Send her in." The door opened. Michael turned around. Julia Vance walked in. She looked different. Gone was the red dress and the extensions. She was wearing a modest grey pantsuit. Her hair was tied back in a severe bun. She looked tired, scared, and very small. She was accompanied by her own lawyer. "Julia," Michael breathed. "What are you doing here? Baby, tell them I loved you." Julia didn't look at him. She walked past him and sat at the far end of the table, next to Emma. "Julia has entered into a cooperation agreement with the district attorney's office," Arthur Sterling announced. "In exchange for immunity regarding the possession of stolen property, specifically the sapphire ring, she has agreed to testify regarding your financial activities." You turned on me?" Michael whispered. The betrayal in his voice was palpable. "I gave you everything." Julia finally looked at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "You gave me a stolen ring and a lease I can't pay for, Michael. The FBI came to my mum's house. They threatened to take her house because you used her address for one of your shell companies." "I was protecting assets," Michael pleaded. "You used my mother," Julia screamed. "You told me you were divorced. You told me Emma didn't care about you. You lied about everything." She took a deep breath and turned to Emma. Emma, I have the files, the ones he kept in the safe at the condo, the black ledger." Michael let out a sound like a wounded animal. "No, not the ledger." "The ledger?" Sarah, the accountant, perked up. "Is that where he kept the records of the kickbacks from the construction vendors?" Julia nodded. "Yes. He was taking 10% off the top from the warehouse expansion project. It's all in there. Dates, amounts, names." Emma looked at Michael. He was slumped in his chair, defeated. The fight had left him. The swagger was gone. The king of logistics was now just a petty thief, caught red-handed by the women he had underestimated. "So," Emma said, clasping her hands, "here is the offer, Michael. And it is a one-time offer." Michael looked up, tears streaming down his face. "What?" "You will sign the divorce papers. You will sign over full custody of the children. Though frankly, seeing as you'll be incarcerated, that's a formality. You will waive all rights to the marital assets. You will leave this marriage with exactly what you came into it with. Nothing." "And if I don't?" "If you don't," Emma said, "I hand the black ledger to the FBI, and instead of 5 years for embezzlement, you'll be looking at 20 years for wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. And I will make sure you serve every single day of it." Michael looked at his lawyer. David Ross shrugged. "Take the deal, Mr. Thorne. You have no cards left." Michael looked at Julia, who was staring at the table, refusing to meet his eyes. He looked at Emma, who looked like a statue of justice carved from ice. He reached for the pen. His hand shook so badly he could barely hold it. He signed the papers. "Good," Emma said. She stood up. "Arthur, file these immediately." She walked over to Julia. For a moment, the two women, the wife and the mistress, stood face to face. "Thank you for the ledger, Julia," Emma said. "I'm sorry," Julia whispered. "I didn't know. I really didn't know." "I know," Emma said. "He fooled us both for a long time. But now—" Emma reached into her purse and pulled out a check. "What is this?" Julia asked. "It's a check for $10,000, Emma said. "Consider it a severance package. Use it to move out of the city. Go back to school. Do something with your life. But if I ever see you in New York again—" "You won't," Julia said quickly, taking the check. "I'm leaving tonight." Emma nodded. She turned and walked toward the door. "Emma!" Michael called out. She stopped, her hand on the handle. She didn't turn around. "Did you ever love me?" he asked, his voice broken. Emma paused. She thought about the early years, the charm, the laughter before the greed took over. "I loved the man I thought you were," she said. But that man never existed. She opened the door and walked out. The legal battle was over. But Emma had one final stop to make. She had to visit the one place where the truth couldn't be hidden to ensure the legacy was truly secure. The heavy steel door of the Sovereign Bank vault swung open with a hydraulic hiss. Emma stood alone in the small, sterile viewing room, the air smelling faintly of dust and old money. On the metal table sat the velvet box containing the thorn sapphire. She opened it one last time. The blue stone stared back at her, cold and indifferent. It was beautiful, yes, but it was toxic. It had destroyed a marriage, ended a career, and sent a man to prison. Emma didn't put it on. Instead, she placed the box back into the rear of deposit box 404. As she slid the box in, her fingernail caught on the felt lining at the bottom of the metal drawer. It was loose. Emma frowned. She pulled at the edge. The felt lifted, revealing a false bottom that Michael, in his greedy haste to grab the shiny ring, had missed entirely. Underneath lay a single, cream-colored envelope. On the front, in handwriting she recognized instantly, were the words, "To Emma, for when the storm comes." It was her father's handwriting. Ethan van der Hoven had been dead for 10 years, yet here he was, speaking from the grave. Her hands trembling, Emma tore open the envelope. "My dearest Emma, if you are reading this, my suspicions about Michael were correct. I always knew he had the appetite of a shark, but the foresight of a goldfish. I knew that eventually his greed would outweigh his caution, and he would raid this box. I assumed he would take the ring. It's the flashiest thing here. But he missed the real treasure, didn't he? Because he didn't look deeper. Enclosed is the access key for the Vincit Holdings account in Zurich. I funneled the royalties from our European patents into it for 20 years. It is not part of the trust. It is yours alone. It was designed to activate only upon proof of legal separation. You are stronger than him. You always were. Now go build something that belongs only to you. Love, Dad." Emma stared at the attached bank statement. With 20 years of compound interest, the number was staggering. It was worth nearly double the current value of Thorn Logistics. Emma started to laugh. It began as a chuckle and grew into a full, liberating sound that echoed off the steel walls. Michael had stolen a $4 million ring and lost his life for it. In doing so, he had missed the $40 million fortune sitting inches beneath it. She pocketed the letter, shoved the drawer shut, and locked it. She didn't need the ring. She had the legacy. Emma walked out of the vault and into the lobby, her heels clicking with renewed purpose. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Arthur Sterling. "Update, Michael accepted the plea deal. 4 years in minimum security. He asked if you would visit before the transfer." Emma didn't hesitate. She typed back, "Tell him I'm busy. I have a company to run." She stepped out onto the Manhattan sidewalk. The air was crisp, the sun reflecting off the glass towers. A black town car was waiting at the curb. The driver held the door open. "Where to, Mrs. Thorne?" the driver asked out of habit. Emma paused, 1 foot inside the car. She looked up at the skyline, then back at the driver. "Not Thorne," she said softly. "Van der Hoven, take me to the office. We have a merger to renegotiate." The driver smiled and nodded. "Understood, Ms. Van der Hoven." Emma slid into the leather seat as the car pulled away, merging into the traffic. She didn't look back at the bank, or the courthouse, or the life she was leaving behind. She looked forward, toward an empire that was finally, truly hers. What a ride. Emma's story proves that while betrayal strikes fast, the truth strikes harder. Michael and Julia thought they were playing a game of checkers, focused on the shiny prize right in front of them. They didn't realize Emma and her father had been playing 4D chess for decades. Michael lost his freedom, Julia lost her dignity. And Emma? She didn't just get her revenge, She reclaimed her identity and a fortune she didn't even know existed. It's a powerful reminder. Never underestimate the quiet ones, and never, ever touch a woman's family heirlooms unless you're ready to pay the price. If you enjoyed this story of high-stakes drama and ultimate karma, please give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow. Share this with a friend who needs a reminder that cheaters never win. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. I'll see you in the next video. Stay safe and watch your back.